Thank you. Is public service broadcasting meaningful and important for culture and education in the future? Of course it is, or should be. This is my topic today. I would like to thank you, first of all, for the invitation. I'm glad to be here. And as a former journalist, I will now tell you a story from Iceland that reminds on the story of what happened to the public service broadcasting here in Greece. In countries where freedom of the press is taken for granted, people expect the facts, news, education, and information to be brought to the public without shareholders or authorities putting their claws into the discussions, without them interfering. In a democratic society, is the press supposed to be free? And we count on that debate. We count on that the debate has a broader channels than the Facebook and other social media. My experience, on the other hand, is that a democratic society or state which allows free media really to be free is a faraway dream. Freedom of press does not exist anywhere in our society. Information and debate is such an important instrument of power in a capitalistic society that it's more or less an automatic priority to have control over the debate. And it is considered worthwhile to use enormous amounts of money in order to gain control over the media. This makes public service broadcasting even more important now than it was in its early days. Now most people have unlimited access to different sources of information, free newspapers, web pages, and people also have access to magazines published by those who want to forward their own interests. But these have very little to do with democracy, free debate, or human rights. One media company after the other has been taken over by powerful and economically strong partnerships who have acquired them without trying to hide their motives. These new owners do not hesitate to create facts rather than to face the facts or react to the facts. Few years ago, when the Icelandic economy collapsed and the so-called kitchenware revolution took place, I still worked in journalism, and I knew all the journalists in the executive committee of the Icelandic Federation of Journalists. I was rather surprised when I saw how fast journalists' ethical rules changed, in addition to their basic journalistic values. This happened both within their federation and in the media companies. The former right-wing prime minister, who was also head of the National Bank at the time of the collapse, and whom the new left-wing government had fired, was made editor-in-chief of the right-wing newspaper Morgunblaðið, the oldest and biggest newspaper in the country. The main aim was to strengthen the interests of those that had been in power, to slander the new left-wing government, and to rewrite the story of the main neoliberalistic power people that turned Iceland upside down. Morgunblaðið was the only newspaper in the country that you could subscribe to, and it was owned by the people that made the Icelandic crisis, just like all other media in Iceland. When the old prime minister in Iceland took over as editor-in-chief, his newspaper fired 40 journalists in one day. Soon thereafter, a new executive committee was elected in the Journalists' Federation. The new committee defended the rights and the freedom of the old minister to fire and hire journalists as he pleased. Journalists that criticized this new order of business were labeled as being left-wing and as being communists, and they were not to be taken seriously in any discussion. In his editorials, the former prime minister continuously attacked not only the government, but also public service radio and TV. For many reasons, not least the fact that the right wing is in control of the media in Iceland, all the media, These slanderous rumors had effect. The credibility of all media was little, and even though many were distrustful of this editor/minister from the old government, his writings and his takeover of the Journalist Federation had a devastating effect. He did indeed succeed in dragging other media down into the mud with him. Distrust towards the press was and is widespread in Iceland. In addition, most of the media has been in financial trouble ever since the crisis. Staff turnover is enormous and journalists are fired on a daily basis. A well-known journalist who has been in the business for decades says that he has stopped bothering to take off his shoes when he comes to work. He simply does not count on making it through the day without being fired. An upcoming journalist from the right wing who came into the board of the Journalistic Federation in Iceland said that the free press should be free to create facts, to please their owners and to please the market. That's the real freedom of the press, he said. This journalist is now one of the press spokesmen for the right government in Iceland. Under circumstances like these, a good public service radio is very important for the education and the culture in the future. News you can trust, and not only flattering news about the authorities, public service media. And we have to have media that does not spin scenarios, does not hide news or beautify news, depending on what is needed. In the report from the Icelandic Parliament Special Investigation Commission after the collapse, it is made clear that all media in Iceland had failed in the run-up to the collapse, including public service media, but the other media were much worse. And Icelandic State Radio did wake up partly after the crisis. New people started to be prominent in debates, critical people, foreigners, and so on. But things have changed again after the right-wing government came to power 1 year ago. The Icelandic State Radio is on the advertising market in a scale that is not very common for public service media in other countries, and it's very dependent on marketing. The director was a marketing man and mostly interested in wiping out the competition by getting hold of all advertising and of popular shows. This was always a problem for the public service radio in Iceland, and after the crisis, things have got really bad. The old marketing philosophy became stronger than ever, involving sponsoring agreements, very tough competition in a narrow and difficult advertising market, and financial situation that kept getting worse after the collapse. The economic situation for media in Iceland was bad and is still getting worse, and there is no agreement concerning the media. It got stuck in the middle of two right-wing groups, of which one is pro the European Union and the other is not. The old Prime Minister continuously attacks the public service radio, and the public service radio in turn answers. And the radio director said, since the state radio is criticized by extremists, both from right and left wing, that must mean we are staying neutral, which is not true. At the moment, Icelanders are at a crossroads with their public service broadcasting. All media is still in crisis. The Icelandic radio suffered from that crisis, even though it's not as serious as the crisis here in Greece, where the national radio was suddenly closed one day. The Icelandic national radio has not been closed, but it is crumbling from inside. This is because of bad management, neoliberalistic marketing philosophy, and lack of competition other than about advertisements and marketing strategies. Competition regarding quality is not strong. But as in Greece, there are many individuals working at the national radio that will not remain in silence and accept that public broadcasting is going to hell. When 60 people in the Icelandic state broadcasting were fired in November, it reminded the Icelanders how important the state media is. They remembered that it used to have a cultural and educational ambitions. People remembered that the Icelandic radio had been concerned about totally different groups than any privately owned media would ever be. At this moment, Icelandic radio has hired new director and the whole upper management of the radio has been fired. The national radio is run with considerable loss, and last week a warning was sent to the Icelandic exchange. There is no way we can predict what will happen in the future. But it is clear that those who know how important it is to have a radio that is run in the public interest, they will concentrate on preserving this media and fight for it in order to save it from what happened to the Greek national broadcasting. It is entirely possible that the radio is even more important, the radio and the TV is even more important than we realize. More important for enlightenment, culture and news, and for the general harmony of the nation. Times are changing, but nonetheless, public service broadcasting still is important, both when we speak of the language, the culture and the news. I think so, at least. It is important for us Icelanders to get a good overview over the events leading up to the closing of the Greek public service broadcasting, and an overview of what will happen in the future. Who wants to have public service media and who does not? And we would like to know what changed in the community here in Greece after this happened. Unfortunately, many that belong to the political parties that are now in power in Iceland, they are against free press and they are against public service broadcasting. They say that the market can take care of it all. So it's clear that in the future of the national media in Iceland is very uncertain. I have been a journalist for nearly 20 years. Most of that time I spent as a news reporter specializing in healthcare, environmental issues and politics. I am not an expert on all broadcasting issues, but I do have a clear idea about the importance of free press and public service broadcasting. I have heard that the importance of the public TV became clear for all viewers in Greece when the government shut it down. In Iceland, we had a dash of this feeling last November when 60 people had to leave their job at the Icelandic radio. I don't know if it will be possible to raise the flag for public service broadcasting again in Greece, but I hope so. And I also hope that we in Iceland will never experience a disaster like you went through, as your public service broadcasting was closed. The danger is there, although. While privately owned media companies are getting worse and public media is closed, we all know Berlusconi and we see what is happening in Ukraine. At this time, I think that the left in Europe and elsewhere should join together to protect the free word and its channels, and we should fight for good public service broadcasting. Yeah, and that would be all.